if you come in with a really solid plan, you work that plan, just like, the 4 or 5 steps I just gave, it doesn't have to be a hard conversation, it doesn't have to be an uncomfortable conversation, but it will be a lot easier to have if it's in the context of a really great environment and a professional, friendly relationship that you have with those team members. So, have a situation that's come up for me recently, and I think your perspective on this could be really interesting. And I've heard this question from clients of mine, and I know that you have experience with this, and I've even experienced this myself. And I think it would be good for both of us to unpack this from 2 different perspectives. And that is the question of what happens when an employee comes to you, whether it's a teacher, whether it is a support staff member, and asks for a raise. We're in interesting economic times right now where we keep hearing in the zeitgeist of small business that it's hard to find good help right now. And that offers an interesting leverage point for team members. And so let's unpack what to do when this happens. And when was the last time this happened for you, Nate?
Last week? No.
Exactly.
It happens regularly. And it's such a good question, Daniel, because I don't know about you, but for me, like, my money story is something I've been working through. Well, you and I have talked about this a bunch, actually, but my money story has been something I've been personally working through for years, trying to get to the other side of it and not have it be like that thing that just immediately when we start talking about money, like, it pushes my buttons, right? And so it's such a great question because we can't really be good leaders. We can't really be good mentors and good studio owners or school owners if every time someone asks for a raise, we just go into a rage. Like, we're like, what? How dare you? So it's a great question.
That's interesting because and I'm not going to make any implication here that your reaction is to fly into a rage, but the thought that I had, the dominant emotion that I see from clients, or I've seen from clients over the years, is more like panic.
Yes.
They either feel unprepared or they're not sure how to handle it. And I think that probably for me, it does raise some uncomfortable feelings because there is a certain amount of emotion and affection that I have for team members.
Yes.
And there's also the assumption that we all need to feel weird when we talk about money.
Yeah.
And so those feelings of discomfort for me in the past and it's not so true now, but for me in the past, it's been, well, I need to figure out how to solve this issue as fast as possible so that we can go back to being friends again, or so that we can go back to there being equilibrium in the relationship.
That's so good. And yeah, you really, actually, I think, dude, you hit it more closely to how I feel. I kind of have this feeling like it's sort of like, wait, what? Are we not friends anymore? Just because they're asking because they're saying, like, I need more money because my rent went up or whatever. They're just trying to revalue themselves. They're trying to figure it out. So yeah, it's an awesome question. And it happens, of course, it is at a school the size of Brooklyn Music Factory. Of course, it happens regularly. We're hiring, we're constantly working on strategies to retain great staff and teachers. And we've talked about this in previous episodes, but it's never an us versus them. I don't want to get into solutions yet because I want to just sit in this for a minute and really try to unpack what the real question is when someone asks for a raise. But they're just like you and I. They're just trying to solve their own financial picture with whatever clarity they have. So they think, you're my boss, I'm going to come to you because I'm saving up to buy a car or whatever. So they're just naturally coming to us and saying, I'd like a raise. And so we need to do 2 things as we try to unpack this question and come up with some possible solutions that everybody can test. We need to first just deal with our emotional response to it, whether it be, offense, rage, panic. And then second, we need to say, how do I systematically prepare to answer a question like this? Again, taking that 10,000-foot view on our company rather than the 1,000-foot, which is the ground level, which is usually leads to panic because we're like, wait, if I don't give you a raise, does that mean you're going to quit tomorrow? Which means I have 25 piano students that don't have a teacher, right?
Yeah.
Which is the
Yes.
total irrational panic, though
Yeah.
I've felt it many times.
So along these lines, I think we even need to examine the form of the question, because I've actually received that question before. And the logical answer to that is, okay, so you want to know how to handle them asking for it?
Right.
Okay, one, have a conversation. Two, come up with a solution. Done. So I think, we are dealing with an emotional thing. And there was something that was really influential that I read 5 years ago from a business coach. And he said, the topic of employee compensation is a game that you can definitely lose, but you can't win. You can at best hope for a draw. Okay. Now that sounds a little pessimistic.
Yeah. Tell me more.
He further elaborated by saying, you're stuck in two possible wrong answers. You can underpay, and again, connected to the emotional question, this could be, panic, fear, the business, no, revenue. You can underpay and try to get the best work out of really talented people, but over time, this breeds resentment. Or you can overpay and try to throw money at your problems. And I think this comes down to who the business owner is, because we'll either try to buy our way out of a problem and avoid the hard conversation, or we will, let the devil on our shoulder tell us to underpay. But if you do overpay, his kind of thought was that now you have entitled prima donnas that are working for you who you are slowly ruining. And the thought was that you need to base, and I think this is where we're going, Nate, but you need to base this question of compensation on, shocker, facts, data, and evidence-based approach, and really figuring out, what is this person worth to the business? Not what is this person worth, but what are they worth to the business? Which you can ask that about yourself. So I want to depressurize that statement. We're not judging the worth of someone, but each person has a worth. They're contributing something to the business, and those salaries are an investment. So I think we've kind of given the big picture away here, but I think now we can kind of dive down and say, what is it that we're actually trying to do? And what can we do when it comes to, this person, this 23-year-old, this, teacher or support team member comes to you and says, hey, I can't pay the rent, and I want to stay here, but I'm going to need more. So I think that's a good way to start out, Nate. I'm going to volley it back over to you, because I'm sure there's probably a big picture thought that you have, and maybe we can dive in deeper from there. But yeah, what are you hearing right now?
Yeah, so I'm going to take that first, that the main point that you just shared there, and which, I mean, I'm a data guy. I freaking love numbers, and I love the stories that the numbers tell, and I love the stories that they tell about our business. And for all of you listening that don't love numbers, the first way to actually get comfortable with numbers is to just reframe them as stories. Be like, So someone comes to me and says, I'm making $35 an hour right now as a teacher. I'd like $40 an hour. Let me give you a concrete example of data that we look at Brooklyn Music Factory and make a simple choice. Because I'm going to also, I'm sure you're not surprised by this, Daniel, but I'm also going to offer a couple of other views on that question. But I
think I even have some to throw in there as well, but
yeah.
I want to hear yours first.
So the first data point we look at is the teacher's retention rate. We're just like, okay, well, what's this retention rate for this teacher over the years? And it's not like it's private knowledge. We talk publicly. We'll talk at our all-staff meeting this Friday about retention and how important a number it is. If you're a SaaS company, they're always talking about churn. It's the same idea. Students are the customers, right? And so when a teacher comes and says, I'd like a $5 raise, which incidentally is a pretty large raise, going from $35 to $40, and we'll talk about what an appropriate raise might be in a moment. But I'm going to go there and I'm going to say, well, what's the average retention rate at Brooklyn Music Factory across all teachers? For us, it's it's in the like 68 to 80 percentile range, right? And some people might be listening that have small studios and be like, what? You lose 20% of your students over every year on average? But the reality is when you get up to 6 to 7 to 800 students, you're looking for the numbers can be slightly different, right? Because they scale differently. But at any rate, so we look there. So let's say someone comes and says, I want a $5 raise, and I look at the retention, and the retention's at 42%. I'm not going to say no, but I'm going to just simply ask, what do you think's happening here?
Right.
Right? I'm just going to go to that number. And so do you really need to know exactly what your average retention rate is for your school over the last 5 years? No, you don't need to know that. But you can intuit it.
Yeah.
And one just word to the wise, because I made this mistake. I still make this mistake, dude, over and over, and it bums me out. Do not use you as the example for the ideal retention rate. That's totally unfair. I teach 7 students and have 100% retention, but I've been teaching for 32 years, and I have 7 students that I plan on taking all the way to college, and they're like 9 to 13 right now. They know it. We talk that way. But don't use you as the sample rate. That can't be the sample.
Yeah.
Because it's unfair. You have to look at all of your other teachers and be like, okay, well, what are you actually retaining at? So anyways, that's a concrete data point that we'll use, and then we'll have an open conversation around it.
Can you bullet point for me? Are there other data points that you look at for teachers other than the retention rate?
Yep.
Without diving into them too deeply, I wonder what some of those others are.
Totally. Some of the other bullets are just, we offer a raise every single year, no matter what. Not no matter what. Obviously, if they're totally an underperforming staff member or teacher and we're trying to coach them out, that's a whole different podcast episode. But let's just assume this is someone where we're like, they're good. They're a solid member of your team. You see a lot of potential. You really want to take the question seriously when they come and ask for a raise. The other data points we'll look at, well, when was the last time you had a raise other than the automatic? Like, for example, we automatically add $1 a year to your hourly. We automatically do a 3% raise for our staff every year. We did it in COVID, even though we were, it was a really difficult time, but we still honored that 3% raise. But it doesn't mean that everybody has only gotten that raise over time. People come and we're like, actually, you're a high performer. We're going to give you a 10% or a 15% raise this season. And so we'll look at that data point. We'll be like, well, wait a minute, dude. You just came to us and asked for a raise 5 months ago. Mm-hmm. So it would be appropriate for us to talk about this in a year.
Yeah.
Not right now. Other data points we'll look at. Let me think about that in terms of, just to bullet it, we'll look to see, other than retention, we'll look to see if there's actually been any issues. Like, so every single one of our employees, every company does this, and this is appropriate, but everybody has a little file, and you're like, if there's been some communication issues, if they've been sick, or they've been trying to reschedule more than the company policy, we have very clear guidelines. We look at those things, and we're like, We even look at another data point, Daniel, we measure whether or not lesson reports are sent within 24 hours every week.
That actually goes back to a previous episode as well, because that is something that BMF measures specifically as a teacher evaluation tool. So it makes sense then that some of those things that you are using as a yardstick for the job performance of the teacher would then be factored in.
Can I make
please.
Before you go on with that, Daniel, let me make a nuance on that. Let me just nuance this for people, because sometimes, especially if you're just starting to scale your studio and you were like me years ago, or like you, Daniel, you have a small, really tight team at your company, right? Mm-hmm. And there was a time in Brooklyn Music Factory's history where, I hired all my friends, so it was a tight-knit crew. And so for those of you that are at that stage of growth, this can feel sort of Big Brother-ish. You're like, wait, what? You measure whether or not they've sent a lesson report every week? And so here's the nuance I want to put on it. This is not something like, our admin staff measures and looks at every week on their own. No, this is just a normal point that at every department meeting, everybody just reports how they're doing. Everybody reports on their big three. And one of the big three is, am I sending my lesson reports? What percentage of my lesson reports have been sent? I'm doing the same thing, dude, when I'm in the piano department meeting. I type it in. Everybody knows how everybody's doing. It's supposed to be a launch point for everyone to understand, oh, this is the value of that, right? But it also helps when coming to a difficult or a potentially difficult conversation around a raise.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting, at least I think is interesting, in this conversation, we are drawing from personal experience, the questions we probably had when this happened to us and how we navigated through it. There is a sense, though, that this is only reflective of our experience. It would be interesting to gather questions that people listening or watching have. And I'm just going to say this, it's actually possible for us to do that, because at any given time, anyone who's listening or watching can go to growyourmusicstudio.com/7FMS and ask us a question. And while we'll probably not do a second episode in this topic, we have a lot. We're very open to the idea of even meeting with people in small groups around certain topics and answering questions that folks have that maybe we didn't think about here on the actual episode. So I'd urge people to go there and submit questions or give us feedback on the episode, that sort of thing. And we can insert your voice into the conversation here.
Can I give an example of a really concrete question that I mean, I'm going to just share. If I were writing into us, here's a question that I would ask, because I have this question. I've really struggled with it, and I'm sure people listening have similar, very specific questions. Like when someone comes and says, I was hired at $30 an hour, but now I want $40 an hour. I want a raise. Is that appropriate to have that a $10 raise? It's hard for us to know, right? So that's a very specific question. And then I started, the answer I came up with was, of course, I reached out to my network and I said, like, how are other people doing this? How do you even know? And so you first reach out to your network, and I found like, oh, well, I went and polled all of the other programs in Brooklyn that, I don't like to use like direct competition, but they were out there. And I just said, I'm friends with some of them. And I was just like, how much do you pay your teachers? And so then I started gauging, well, what's market rate, right? And I knew if we were below it, or if we were at it, or if we were above it. And so when someone comes and asks a question like, can I get a $10 raise to $40 an hour? In the case of Brooklyn, our market rate is right around is between like 38 and like $42 to $44. Like that's the hourly, that's about the average, right? And so I know when I'm looking at an employee that comes in and asks for a raise, and they've only been with us for a year, and they're maybe a younger, less experienced teacher, and they're at 35 an hour, and they're like, I want 45 an hour. Well, I already know it's a very easy answer to be like, that's not appropriate. I can't do 45 an hour, but I think it's great to work towards between 40 and 45 an hour. What do you think we'd need to do to get there? Anyways, so that's a very specific question that I've confronted. So if listeners are like, man, dude, I have a similar question, but it's a slightly different, like it's send it in, because I don't know. I'm sure if Daniel and I don't know the answer, we got a lot of friends and we're willing to ask.
Oh, no doubt. Now, I loved your list earlier. I think there's two thoughts I want to contribute to the conversation. And again, I think everyone listening to this, although this is a little bit more of a freewheeling, casual conversation, you can certainly, I don't know. I used to listen to podcasts and take notes when I was in learning mode for marketing a decade ago. So I don't know if people are taking notes, but there's certainly some great thoughts that have already been contributed here by you, Nate. There's two thoughts that I would contribute as well, how I handled that question that you just asked. First one was, in doing that market research, and I'm going to go more on the support staff side because that's where I have a lot more experience. I used salary comparison websites. So salary.com, from everything from video editors to executive assistants to content managers, operations people, I would go in and look, and salary.com has a range of factors that contribute to it, such as years in the job, geographical location, whether they're remote or in person. And you can really get granular on what that role should be paid. But there was something that you actually told me that was helpful, that site, when I came to you about a year ago and we had a conversation about this,
Yeah.
there was something that you said to me that didn't even register for me. And that is, most of those roles in salary.com, they're referring to corporate America when they talk about those roles. And this is where I think I'm going to volley it back to you, that there's another factor at play there, which is they're not often talking about, or they're never talking about your business. They're rarely talking about small business when they're publishing these roles, but they're definitely not talking about your business. And so there is a there is a perspective that one needs to have even when you're looking at data like that. And that is, you have to see again what that person is worth to the company and what their role is doing and how that can be justified in the revenue profile that the company has. But that's certainly a best practice that I had, was doing that comparison. And so a lot of those questions I have, like, well, what is this person, what is this person's role worth? That was a huge breakthrough point for me many years ago, and a good starting point.
It's a great starting point. Honestly, I think it's always going to be a balance between your network, reaching out to those you know and trust, and asking them for help. Okay, and this is a perfect example. You just literally reach out and say, "What are you paying?" Your A teachers, what are you paying? Your B teachers, what are you paying teachers that maybe aren't that strong? And then you balance that with that kind of deep research you're talking about, at salary.com or Glassdoor or one of those sites where you can really get amazing research done. I remember we had that conversation, dude, and I went straight to that site and did a whole pile of research around a marketing role I needed to hire for. So I was really grateful. And so I was actually digging through my files because I wanted to share one other data point. And I don't have the precise numbers here right now, but I'm going to just share the concept. And then maybe we'll come back to it in another episode. But you can research quite easily what the industry averages are across America for music schools and what their operating expenses are, down to what the percent. For example, I know very well what the average percent of total revenue that goes to rent. It's 4%. And why do I know that number so well? Because it's way lower than what I'm paying in Brooklyn. So I'm always trying to figure out, how do I get it down to the national average? You can also find out what percentage of revenue on average in America across all music schools go to pay employees. So why do I say this? Because, Daniel, your point is so valuable. You're like, you can do some deep research on a place like salary.com, et cetera, but you have to make sure you're always framing it correctly. For most of us, we're very small businesses in the scheme of things, and so we want to make sure we couple that information with information that's relative to the scale of our business, right? A $1 or $2 million music school is a very, very small business, right? A $300,000 music school is a micro business, right? So when someone comes and says, well, I deserve to be paid $100,000 a year in my position as a piano teacher, you can simply say, if you're $1 million school, you're like, I cannot afford to give 10% of our income to you solely. It doesn't jive with the average.
Now, I think we would look at that and balk at that number for, a piano teacher that's maybe teaching 20, 30 hours a week. But what about someone who has a much greater role in the company? Like they're a marketing manager, they can perhaps go to a different type of business and justify that cost. What do you say to someone, or how do you hire for that role where maybe in a different industry, they'd be making a lot more? I'm curious. What are your thoughts on that?
So do we need to put in our notes, because that's such a good question that it should be another episode in terms of why do people actually want to work at your school, which is a different question than how do you address the fact that you'll never actually be able to pay the industry average for that position, right? And the way I address it, or the way I have addressed it to date, that's, I'd say, mostly worked, sometimes hasn't,
Mm.
but is first of all, I've had to ask really hard questions of myself. Like, as much as I really want a full time, for example, marketing manager, do I actually need that for a business my
Yes.
size? So then, if I can't, I don't really. So here's the spoiler. No, you don't need it.
Yeah.
I thought I needed it, and I had someone I really really loved in the position, and we're great friends, etc. But the reality is like I eventually scaled that position back to 20 hours a week, and eventually it was like 10 hours a week, which is kind of more appropriate for a school our size. And so then once you get down to those number of hours, you can start thinking like, well, maybe I could pay 50 an hour. Maybe I could pay 30 an hour, or whatever the appropriate amount is. So that's one answer to the question. The second answer to the question is, and this part is where it gets a little nebulous and people will be like, wait, Nate, that's a little bit of a cop out, but here's the deal. Is if you are running a business that you are so passionate about, you have such a clear mission as to why your music school matters in the town it's in, you will attract really, really good people, because people want to work with people that have a vision, right? They want to make change. And so the dollar amount that they're getting paid, of course that matters because we all have bills to pay, but the vision actually matters more to those people. So anyways, that's another episode. But
Yeah.
but it's a pitch, and I remember one of the last point, and then we'll move forward, because I want to cover a couple of other things about getting back to that uncomfortable conversation and how to approach it a little bit.
Interesting. 'Cause that's where I want to go next too.
Okay, good, because
Yeah.
I want to go back into the room where you're sweating bullets, and the person's waiting for your answer. So we gotta help you get through that moment. But what I wanted to share was one of the important breakthroughs for me around attracting really great teachers or staff was when someone was like, Nate, it's all marketing. And marketing is all about sharing what you love, right? And so in the case of what we do, it's that we love to transform. I'm talking about we, the big we, all of us listeners, and Daniel and myself. It's like we are in the business of transforming lives. In the case of music school owners, we're doing it through music education. And so when you're pitching a position in a program or in a school or in a company where you could potentially be changing people's lives, it all of a sudden becomes a very different conversation. It's not just about whether or not you pay market rate. That's all I'm going to say on that.
Yeah.
So
My experience backs that up, in that I even have a team member right now who is leaving. I'm not kidding. Who is ending a job that pays more because this particular team member has revealed and said to me, I love working here.
yeah,
We can't assume what's going on in the other person's mind. And this is, and having a professional relationship, but a professional one with the team, being involved, being accessible, creating a great working environment, all of these things lead to making these conversations that much less uncomfortable. And that's where I want to go next, and potentially even where we end.
Yep.
So I want to at least give the answer for how I would answer the question we proposed at the top of the show. At least from my perspective. And Nate, what I would invite you to do is, if you hear anything interesting in there, or you want me to elaborate on something more, I'm going to kind of rely on you to draw that out of me if I'm being unclear. And then I would love to know how you would modify things or how you would do things differently. But I want to give a specific step-by-step, not super detailed, but a step-by-step by how I've handled this. This conversation. And what it looks like is, one, I let the person know, we're coming up on your 1 year from when we originally hired you, or, your anniversary date, your 3rd year anniversary, or it's the end of the year.
Yeah.
And with advance notice, I proactively put on the calendar that, hey, let's talk about 2022. Let's have a discussion about what we did this past year. what's worked for you, what hasn't worked for you, where you have felt great about your contribution, where you feel unclear, where even maybe you feel uncomfortable. Now, keep in mind, when I either Slack this or have a conversation in person or send an email about this, this isn't coming out of the blue. This is coming from a place of, I speak that frankly to people all the time. We're in in Slack every day, leaving jokes for each other, talking about the job, talking about things outside the job. Like I blew up our Slack today because I saw the movie Dune last night and was absolutely blown away by it. So everyone in the company now knows that this is like one of the best movies I've seen in the last 10 years. So they're already making fun of me about it in some respects. That's the environment in which this happens. So a date is put in the calendar. And then, prior to that date, there is some setup material. I'm sending them questions, letting them know what the conversation is going to be about. I get to the conversation. They're ready. I'm ready. And we have the conversation. I'm casual about it in a professional way, but
I pause there for a second, Daniel. Just specificity. Give us an example of one of the questions that they get in advance that they could prepare.
Yeah. So I'm going to give a specific answer, and then I'm going to give some homework to people listening. So I actually gave a couple of them a second ago. Like how do you feel you contributed in the last year?
Love it.
What was the most exciting project you worked on? What do you want to do more of in 2022? What do you want to do less of in 2022? Where do you see yourself in 3 years? Mm-hmm. What's your vision? Now, I think some of these questions probably are more or better suited for support staff than teachers. Some of these probably wouldn't apply as much to teachers. The question like, what project most excited you this past year? Well, if they're teaching 25 private students, they might not have had a project.
Yeah, but I'd push back on it. I would say, what students? Yeah, what students are you really proud of? I think you could absolutely do that, dude. I think it's a great question.
Well, I think that's just a reforming of the question and a really, really good one for the teacher. And I think, Nate, I want you to weigh in here in just a minute on how you'd reform some of these questions for teachers or things of that nature. But to kind of finish the train of thought we're on before I pop it back over to you, I think that's a sampling of some of the questions. And this is where I'm going to put on my coaching hat, because that's really where I have a lot of passion. It is surprising to me, even with studio owners that are in the high 6 figures, low 7 figures, mids, how often I find that they probably already have a system that they're doing this, but they don't think it's as good as it could be. And so I do get really basic questions like this. And the thing to get to the point, the thing that surprises me is how often that I see people operating kind of from the seat of their pants, where they haven't they haven't prepared in advance for it. They're not thinking about their business any farther than 15 to 30 days out from where they're at currently.
Yeah.
And so these questions come up and there's a real shock, because there isn't a systematic nature to the way they're running the business. There isn't a systematic nature to the way that they're dealing with staff. They don't have a vision for that. And of course, I'm not painting with a broad brush everybody. I'm sure, if there's a person out there listening who says, well, I do all of that, they're probably not offended because they're, super grounded and everything. But more often than not, I do get folks where they feel they feel a little bit flat-footed, or they don't feel that they're doing the best job. And what I'd say is Google is your friend. A lot of the questions that I just rattled off there, they're now second nature to me, because at a certain point, I Googled, found 100 different questions, rejected 90 of them, but the 10 that were really meaningful for my company, I kept. And so it's just a matter of being persistent, seeing what works. There's questions I used to ask that I don't ask anymore, because as it turns out, it wasn't actually that good a question to ask for their role. And, School of Hard Knocks and learning through experience, I've come to the ones that are meaningful for what we do. And now we've got just a really great team of excited people who know that I'm on their side and that I'm not afraid to ask those questions. And I can kind of smoothly move through these conversations, even though, if I'm being honest, they still do, in the initial asking of them, there might be a little rise of like, oh, that conversation again. But yes. I think if you come in with a really solid plan, you work that plan, just like, the 4 or 5 steps I just gave. It doesn't have to be a hard conversation. It doesn't have to be an uncomfortable conversation, but it will be a lot easier to have if it's in the context of a really great environment and a professional friendly relationship that you have with those team members.
Yeah. So can I repeat back
Oh,
just 2 or
please.
3 points that I hear you sharing that I
Yeah.
think are just, they need to be highlighted with one of those huge jumbo highlighters. The first is you're pointing out that you already have an open, transparent, conversational relationship with your staff and your team. This is something that I find still bums me out sometimes in my workplace where, I'll show up like I literally still do desk duty. I love it. I get to see families. I get to see the kids. We're in our community room. It's a really valuable, handful of hours I might spend in a week, right? But what I'll notice is that I don't take the time as the teachers are coming and going to just pause for like 3 minutes and be like, how you doing? And then having a nice casual conversation because we'll sort of be in work mode, right? So the first thing I hear you saying is like, remember, these are relationships that you're hoping to maintain for a long period of time. So, relationships are built on sharing. It's a two-way street, right? You share that you love Dune. Somebody else shares what they did last night, like this thing. And then that makes the conversation when that employee comes to you and says, I think I deserve a raise, a much easier one because you're already comfortable talking to these people. So that's the first thing I hear highlighted. The second thing I hear you say that is so valuable is, and it reminded me of this great coaching I got from a friend of mine, Amy, who's head of HR or was head of HR at Robinhood, which is the nonprofit
Investing app. Yeah. Right.
Well, no, not the investing app. Good. They're on the scene late. Well, they were on the scene, whatever, 9 months ago. But no, Robinhood's is a big NGO here in New York.
Oh, okay.
A lot of good work. And so I don't even, she had a lot of employees that she was working with, and she was head of HR, and she came and coached me and my team just on this very topic, like how do you have these meetings? And she said, number one, your questions, and you're saying you got to send them questions. You got to know that they need to know that they're stepping into this conversation. It's totally unfair to be like, hey, will you step into my office? I mean, we don't really have offices. Step into my music studio, and then all of a sudden spring a question on them. But her point was like, you can ask keep it super simple. Just what you said. What do you feel like you're excelling at? What do you feel like you need to work on? And then when you're done, you can be like, okay, we agree you're doing great here. We both agree that these are a couple things you need to work on. How about, getting back to the original question, how about we link financial compensation to evidence of you improving on the things that you say you need to improve on? Right? So now we're having a conversation where it's like, it's actually linked to something. It's just not cash in the ether. It's not like, okay, you should just get more money. And then the last point you made, and you sort of like moved quickly through it, but I think it's so important. You said people aren't prepared for this. Well, here's the deal. If you and I get a question from an employee like this one, guess what? We're going to get the question again and again and again. So rest assured, my friends, if we've heard the question, it's going to come up again. So we might as well come up with some kind of system to address the question, even if it's a sort of B- system to start. It is a hella better than no system at all and being, as you put it, Daniel, flat-footed the next time it comes along. So consistency is key. Build some kind of super simple system for this, and then just try desperately to test it, once a year, once every 6 months. It doesn't ever need to be more than that. Not for a music school with 10 teachers and 3 staff. Once a year is plenty to have these conversations. So those were really, anyways, those were super good points, Daniel. And can I share just a personal story of like kind of a pain point to maybe close out our episode on this?
I was just thinking it might be time to end this thing.
Okay. Yeah. I don't even know. We've probably been going way too long, but anyways, there's a lot of good stuff to talk. I mean, it's just such a good question. So this happened last May where 3 of our longtime teachers came, I think I shared this with you, came to me and said, Nate, we need to get paid more. But they connected with one another, and then they came as a team. And they're like, we need to get paid more. Otherwise, we can't stay past this season. And they were like, I've known these, some of them have been here for 5 years or more. And they're highly valued. They're full-time teachers. They teach between, 19 and 23 hours a week or something like that, right? Which is a lot. Like for us, that's the cutoff. You can't teach more than 23 to 25 hours would be tops, and
Mm.
that'd be a quality teacher. I mean, at any rate, so they came to me, and that hurt because it felt like I was being almost sort of ambushed.
Like ganged up on almost.
Yeah, ganged up, and
And
I was just like,
ambushed. Yeah.
and I was literally driving home from our place in Maine with my daughter and her three friends, and we were stopping for ice cream, and I get this, email,
Mm.
and I was just like, oh man, it was a total gut punch, and I share this story because for two reasons. One, they felt comfortable enough in our relationship to say, here's where we've reached, and we're reaching out to you.
Because it wasn't malicious.
Not at all. They were saying, we believe we're valuable. We believe in what you're doing. We think we want to be here. And this is what we need in order to stay. Second of all, it was one of those moments for me where I was like, okay, wait. We had a clear roadmap of raises for them, but for some reason I hadn't made it clear. They hadn't seen that was on the table, even though I had discussed it at some point. And honestly, between you and I, Daniel, I got sidetracked, the pandemic, like I had other priorities, one of which was keeping the business afloat, right? So like
I was there for part of that.
Yeah,
So
you
yeah,
were-
I know
I
exactly what you're talking
know.
about.
You were totally there. And so I took my eyes off, honestly, the most important piece in our business, which are the people.
Mm.
And so I had to sit with it for a hot minute. It's not like I wrote them back right away, but let me just say precisely what I did. I did write them back immediately, and I booked a time to meet. So I was like, the following Tuesday or whatever at 9 a.m., can we all get together and talk about it? So now I had a deadline to respond, right? I couldn't use my avoidance tendencies to be like,
100%.
Okay. Secondly, I went back through all of these questions that we've talked about and asked myself, how has their performance been? How has their retention been? What is like, how long have they been with us? Are they actually asking for much more than I was already intending to pay them anyways on schedule? And what happened was it made me realize that, oh, wait, they're not actually asking for that much more than I was already intending to pay them. But, say 6 months later, that's number one. And number two, it gave us an opportunity to double down on our mission as a school. And for me to say, I appreciate that you guys are all in. That was what the conversation was about. It wasn't about, do you deserve the money? It was about, tell me, let's talk about your commitment to our mission. And how, if we can move forward, if the company can afford to do this, mind you, it's not me paying them. It's if the company can afford to do this, what can we realize together over the next 3 years?
That is a brilliant reframe. And I think it almost would be easy to look at what you said there and thought, oh, that was a solution. Okay. If that reframe doesn't hit you like a ton of bricks, I think hit the back button on the podcast and listen to that again, because that is taking what could be an uncomfortable or disastrous conversation and keeping everyone focused on the goal. And it is an evidence of your commitment to running a systematic values-based business versus just putting out fires. But all you will ever be doing is putting out fires if you're not operating from first principles, if you're not operating from a systematic point of view. And so really the punchline of all this is that any troubleshooting that comes up for a school or any business is often an evidence that a deeper, more foundational, that something deeper and more foundational is missing.
Yeah, and it's an opportunity, right?
But it is an opportunity, and it doesn't, oh, well, it might, but I'm just going to say this at the risk of being wrong. It probably doesn't matter what situation or fire is staring you in the face right now. Each one of those is an opportunity to start that systems values based, foundational based business,
Mm-hmm.
at least in that area. If you'll do that extra work of not just trying to solve the problem at the surface level, but looking below it and saying, well, how can I solve this problem once and for all? And then looking at the spider web of implications that has for other areas of the business and just starting to backfill that out systematically. And then one day you wake up and everything is running super smoothly, and you've got a team that loves you, and you've got families that are really committed to staying in the school. And it's a lot better than, or it can be better over time if you have that commitment to going deeper.
Yeah, and Daniel, you know what? We're gonna. There will be many more teachers that come ask for a raise,
Yeah,
and it's gonna happen over and over and over. And imagine just looking forward to the conversation.
100%.
That's what you're like, a system that runs well where people love being there. People feel safe coming to you and having that conversation. And guess what? Your palms, aren't totally sweaty, and you're not just counting the minutes to get out of it.
100%. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you, Daniel. As a rock solid, I mean, we covered a lot there, but hopefully people are leaving with one or two concrete tools to address that conversation. Yeah, that they can use, because it's going to come up in the next month or two, 3,
100%.
4,
And I'll say that, let's say we get 3, 5, 7 questions coming in at, GrowYourMusicStudio.com/7FMS. I'd say if we get 5 questions coming in, either an objection to something we've said, someone asking for greater nuance, someone asking for a clarification or just a question around this. If we had enough, let's say within the next month after this was published, I'd be more than happy to perhaps do just a Q&A episode around this, or do a live Q&A with the people who send them in. So how does that sound to you, Nate?
I would love to do a live Q&A too. But yeah, awesome. Totally down.
Cool. All right. Well, let's call it a wrap, and we'll see you next time.
Okay. Thank you all.